Hello everyone, welcome back to Sigil. My name is Kevbot, and in today's video, I'll be going over a painting technique I use for repainting pre-painted miniatures from miniature booster boxes. Although I try to buy unpainted miniatures whenever I can, sometimes there are no unpainted versions of the specific miniature that I need for my game. While the paint job on these miniatures isn't awful, it's definitely not up to the standard that I like for my games. However, these miniatures can be difficult to paint well using the standard techniques of base coating, washing, dry brushing, and highlighting, because there aren't as defined of details that you see on unpainted miniatures. So I wanted to make a video of the technique I use for this, which requires almost no skill and can bring the miniatures to tabletop ready within minutes. I'll go over the technique in this video using the Orog from the Rime of the Frostmaiden booster set of pre-painted miniatures, and show you how I paint it and the quality you can get in real time. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get right on into it. So here we have the model that I will be repainting. It is the Orog from the Rime of the Frostmaiden booster boxes. And it's not an awful paint job at all. It's just very flat and not something that I would love to put down on the table. Lots that we'll be able to fix in just a few minutes here with our painting technique. So the first thing that we want to do is to prime the miniature. I use a spray primer here because the key is to put on light coats. We don't want to clog up all the details because there aren't very many details on these pre-painted miniatures to begin with. So I'm just giving it a light airbrushing of a white primer. You can use a brush on primer, just be pretty light with it. Again, we don't want to clog up the details, just enough of a base for the colors to get painted onto it. Once the primer has dried, we can then go ahead to our painting step. So for this painting step, I use the Army Painter speed paints. There are lots of different brands that have speed paints now. Vallejo, I know, has speed paints. Citadel, I believe, was the first company to start with speed paints. So you can use any speed paints that you like. My personal preference is the Army Painter ones. And the reason why I like these Army Painter speed paints and speed paints in general for this is because they are very thin. They almost go on the same thickness as a wash would go on. So one of the issues with repainting these miniatures with acrylics is acrylics are thick and heavy, and we need lots of coats to get to the level that the speed paints get us to. First putting on the acrylic, and then putting on a wash, and then putting on the highlights. With this step, with just putting on the speed paints, we kind of get the base coat and the wash all in one go, and they both go on very thin. Like I said, about the same thickness as a wash. So this allows us to get the same depth of shadow that we would get from the standard technique without clogging up all the details. Again, this is a technique that you could use on the unpainted ones as well. But with the unpainted minis, you don't have to worry so much about clogging up the details because they are designed to be painted on. But here I just use the Games Workshop paints to paint on, starting with the skin. I like to start on the inside and then work out. Again, here there's no technique that you need. It's just putting paint onto the brush and then putting the brush onto the miniature itself. For the next step, I'll move up to the metallic. So we'll start painting on some of the silver here. For this mini, I'm using 5 different colors, including the black for the base as well. So I have the whole set, but if you are new to this, if you just want to kind of go take it one mini at a time, it's usually anywhere from like say 3 to 7 colors that you would use for each mini. So you can kind of build your collection as you go as well, and slowly build it up over time instead of having to drop the hundreds of dollars on a full set of speed paints. So here I'm moving on to kind of the more brassy metals. In the images, there are some silver metals and some brassy metals. So just again going over those parts here with this speed paint. Next up, we're going to do some of the browns here. Here again, we can see that this brown really gives us the depth of shadow as opposed to the brown on the pre-painted. It's a pretty flat brown, so we have a kind of a non-metallic metals that we've painted in and kind of a flat brown. So these metals are now much more shiny and glossy and actually look metallic. And this brown gives us lots of nice depth, some darkness in the recesses, as well as some more bright browns at the higher points. And you can see again here, I'm just kind of putting the paint on my brush and then putting onto the mini. There's no fancy dry brushing. There's no fancy glazing at this point. This is something that literally anybody could do. Anybody without any kind of mini painting experience would be able to just throw some of these paints on the brush, throw it onto the mini, and already see much higher quality than we would have on the pre-painted version. Here I'm using a second different kind of brown for the cape just to give a little bit of a distinction there. Again, if I didn't have all the colors, I might want to save some money by just using the same brown for all parts of it and kind of build up your collection, like I said, of colors by doing it one mini at a time. And there are some cost saving aspects, but again, here we can just see that this adds a lot of depth into that cape of his and gives a little bit more delineation between the browns on the back compared to the browns on the front. And then here I'm actually going to use a third brown just for the handle on the shaft as well as his bracers. Again, you could totally get away with just using one brown for all of this, but I like to put on the three different browns here just to give that little bit of a separation. And the last one that we'll use here is the black, just a little bit of black for his little tuft of hair on the top, as well as black on the base. And here we can see a side by side of the pre-painted version versus what we just did. And you can see how with this method, within about 10 minutes worth of painting, absolutely no technique at all. There's a huge difference between the pre-painted version and the one that we did. Again, super fast, super easy, anybody could do it. And just using that technique alone will get us up to that standard of tabletop quality. Now, we could definitely stop here, and I think that this already looks infinitely better than the original. But one last step that I like to do on this is just to actually come back with the acrylics just for a little bit of highlighting. Now, again, here we want to be a little bit careful not to clog up the details because, as I mentioned before, part of the reason why we use the speed paints and not the acrylics is to avoid with clogging up any details. Now, again, this kind of third level that we have here is completely optional. I think that it's perfectly usable just with the technique that we've done so far. But what I like to do, because I do have all these acrylics, is just come in and do a little bit of a highlight slash glaze on certain aspects of the miniature. Mainly with the metals, I find that sometimes the metals for speed paints can be a little bit weak. So I don't want to completely cover the whole metal area. I just want to cover some different aspects to, again, give that delineation and just bring in a little bit more shine. Starting with the gunmetal here on the blade of the axe. And I'm just going to do a little bit of some lines on the gauntlets just to kind of bring back a little bit of sheen. Again, we're not doing like a full coverage here. And it's all very watered down to help it to flow and blend into the speed paints that we've already put on, but this is just going to give us one final layer to really make the colors pop, where the speed paints will give us the kind of base coverage as well as the shadows. The coming back in and just doing a little bit of highlight work and being very selective on the highlight work that we do will just kind of help to make the mini pop as well. And again, this step is totally optional, and it is another cost to the mini painting as well, because now we have to go out and get acrylics if you don't already have any. But it is very fast as well. It's a little bit more skill because we do want to water down the paints, and again, kind of just glaze it on to make sure that doesn't go on too thick, and to also help with the acrylic blending in with the base coating of the speed paint. So it's a little bit more technique here, although not too much technique. It takes a little bit more time. Again, not too much more time. It'll just be a few minutes for this step, but it's just a little bit more time, a little bit more technique, a little bit more paints, but you'll be able to see the final product. Comparing all three of them, we'll really get a lot out of this. And here you'll see with the browns, the paint is very watered down. So when I first apply it here, it looks pretty streaky, and it looks like it doesn't fit in well with the browns at all. But when the paint dries, because it's so watered down, it will really blend in nicely, which you'll be able to see on the final product. And again, we're just looking at getting the top edges now, just again to give us now the depth in the base from the speed paints, as well as the highlights on the higher points here. And here we see the final product, the pre-painted on the left-hand side, just the speed paints in the middle, and the speed paints and acrylic on the right-hand side. And we can really see how with just a few minutes of painting, 10 minutes for the speed paints and 15 for the speed paints and acrylics, we can really get a very high-quality miniature out of these techniques. And so that's my technique that I use for repainting pre-painted miniatures in minutes with little skill required to get them to a tabletop ready condition. You could probably use this technique on unpainted miniatures as well for simple speed paints, but I still use the standard painting techniques on those of base coating, washing, dry brushing, and highlighting because I feel it produces a better result overall. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you've never painted a miniature before, maybe it will give you the confidence to be able to start. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Kevbot. Now get out there and paint your miniatures.